Our next speaker is David Clements, who's State Manager for NDS. Now, you'll be wondering yourself, well, I've heard all about NDIS, and I've heard all about NDIA. You're about to hear about the National Disability Service. David will make it very clear what NDS is and what it'll do for us all. Welcome to the stage, David Clements. Thank you.
So I'd just like to also acknowledge the traditional owners on the land of which we're meeting and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and also to any Aboriginal people who are here today. So Sue's gone over this. I dropped this in just in case you didn't get a chance to have a look at this, because it is kind of important in terms of how the flow of the scheme will roll out into Tasmania. Okay. You can see those clearly, though, that as Sue's already mentioned, this is the most important social transformation of human services since the introduction of Medicare, but it's not the only reform that's going on that is pertinent to people in this room. And there is, the NDIS is occurring in the context of broader reform. So I'm coming at this very much from the perspective of what this means for service provider organisations. As Andrew alluded, NDS is not the NDIS, it is not the NDIA. National Disability Services is the industry association for service provider organisations. We've been around for 75 years in different guises, have about 1,100 member organisations across the country, and those organisations provide supports to people with disability across a range of areas, from in-home and personal care through to community access support and supports with employment. So I'll just move through the NAT because we've talked about that. And I guess what I really wanted to highlight is from our perspective, and there's been a lot of talk, and Sandy mentioned it this morning also, the concept of recovery, questions around how it fits in with the scheme, and certainly the view that I take is that there is some congruence, let's say, between the concept of a recovery model and the insurance approach that's being taken with this scheme. So people with psychosocial disability do fit within the concepts of this scheme and the principles of the scheme and should be able to be supported. And as it says there, this heralds a new set of opportunities and risks. So I'm not saying it's all a very wonderful, glowing experience. As we know, there are some of those elements of the scheme that are around psychosocial disability that haven't yet been clearly determined as to how they will move into the future. And for providers, that raises some questions for them as well. So that's what I've just said. There's a lack of clarity about how it will roll out from the perspective of people affected by psychosocial disability and for the providers who are supporting them. However, it hasn't prevented people from entering the scheme, and Sue's just given a very clear example of one family's situation where they have been able to receive support. Okay, so again, Sue's been through these, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I think what's probably more valuable is that we have an opportunity to get the panel up here and we can have some interaction with you. Okay. So this is a little bit more detail around the broader reforms that are occurring. This might be known to many of you, but I think it's important just again in terms of situating the NDIS and its relationship with the mental health sector, and both for service users, consumers, and for service providers. So what it points out there is that there are different ways of services and funding being structured that then make it onto the ground to support people at the local level. And really this is a fundamental shift for many, in fact pretty much all providers, because effectively what the introduction of the reforms in the NDIS that are also happening in some ways, in similar ways in the aged care sector, and now through the primary health networks with mental health commissioning, is the shift from how the funding flows for services to be delivered. So traditionally it would be that governments would give money to an organisation in a big chunk. We refer to that as block funding. And now what's happening with person-centred approaches and individualised funding packages is a very fundamental shift to the consumers being the ones who have the power, let's say, to make decisions about where and who they wish to provide supports to them. So, what that means for providers is that they need to shift the way that they engage, and maybe traditionally, particularly in the specialist disability space, how they provide the supports and how they promote the way that they can provide the support, so that the people who are holding the purse strings effectively will choose that provider over another one. So it introduces language of market. And I know Sandy, as an old lefty, how did you refer to yourself this morning? A commie pinko Western, yep, there we go. This might be an anathema. So there might be some interesting conversation we can have about that in a few minutes' time as well. But what it does mean for providers is that, again, the horse is bolted. Governments across the country have agreed that this is going to provide value, both for individuals by giving them choice, putting the purchasing power in their own hands and pockets, and there's an element of wanting to see better quality services delivered on the ground and driving efficiency so that there's a saving to the taxpayer, whether that's through federal government funds or state government funds. Okay. So what that means is very clearly that we need to have a different view and different way of working, and that results in shifts in the skill sets of workers, shifts in the way that they understand their jobs, not necessarily significantly. If again in the mental health space, I think you're ahead of the head of the disability sector in terms of having that very much person-centred, consumer-driven direction in the way supports are offered and delivered at a whole. But it will mean that workers have to change the way that they engage with people. So there'll be more people being supported either in their own homes or in the community, instead of what used to happen in the disability space, and to some extent still does, people being offered supports in community centres or halls like this, where they might do some community or recreational activities. It also means for providers, and this is probably a bit boring for those of you who are focused on the ground, but it will have an impact on all levels of an organisation, is that the way that information about how an engagement occurs with a service user or a consumer has to change. So it might be that in the past, as we heard this morning, you know, the notion of a case note being taken outside of someone's interaction with a consumer, that will have to shift. So it might well be that the support worker is capturing information about what they're doing with the person to help them along their journey, and that might be agreed and captured right there at the time of interaction, and it has to have a much faster way of being able to be brought up, because the outcomes that are being sought by the consumer has to also relate to the way the organisation gets paid through its billing system. So there's a whole lot of interaction that has to happen sort of behind the scenes, or what we refer to as back office, to make sure that those activities are being captured so that providers can get paid, so that they can get their workers paid so that they can keep delivering services to consumers. Okay, so we have had nearly 3 years of trial around the country, and for providers, these are some of the critical things that we've heard as NDS from our members for potential new organisations seeking to engage or participate, register to deliver services in the NDIS. So I won't go through these in great detail because, again, I think it's probably more valuable to get to the panel. But I will just point out that last one there talks about cultural change, and that's a fundamental shift. I started to touch or allude to the relationship between workers and consumers needing to shift and change, and the power dynamic will shift, and that's critical. And that concept of being much more focused on consumer outcomes needs to flow through all levels of organisations. And I'm not saying that that's an easy task. It's not something that can be, you roll out a training program and there you go, it's done. There is investment in time and energy and ongoing learning that needs to occur over a good 12, 18, 24-month period in an organisation to make sure that those things are bedded down. Okay. So critical will be that organisations have the business management capabilities to thrive in this market-based system that we're moving to, and they'll be able to demonstrate good practice across their data collection and knowledge management systems, which is basically what I was just talking about before. You need to know what you're doing at a frontline level with consumers and be able to report that quickly and efficiently. Okay, so again, here's a little plug for a program that we've partnered with a group in Victoria for providers that will assist them to lift their ICT capabilities, information communication technology capabilities. But it's an important one because if you're a smaller organisation, and I know that there are organisations in Tasmania who still rely predominantly on paper-based recording of what's going on, in an NDIS environment, that will not be, that won't be relevant. You won't be able to engage and capture the information into the billing system that the NDIA requires. So that's worthwhile being aware of. Okay. From the perspective of a potential consumer, I guess the question for us, we want to know is what would you want to see in an organisation around quality and safeguarding that would suit your needs? And how would they demonstrate that to you? So that's something to ponder. So you've got that question there. That's one for the providers in the room, of course. Okay, so another point that there's clear relationships between the quality of services that are being provided, ensuring that they're safe, that workers are doing what they're being asked to do in a reasonable manner, and that for a back office relationship that they're all there as well. Okay. Another plug for a joint project between the Mental Health Council of Tasmania and ourselves, funded by the Partners in Recovery program. And that essentially is about getting organisations ready to operate in this new environment. So we've started that project. We've got a person some of you may know, Dr. Becky Shelley, who's been involved in PIR in the past, and engaged in some of those organisational transformation processes that NDS members have been grappling with. So she's highly experienced and understands the challenges for providers. So we've engaged her on a short term as a consultant to deliver this organisational transformation program to mental health provider organisations. And so if there are organisations out there that haven't yet heard of this, and you're interested in understanding what the challenges are, and if you're looking for a roadmap about how to get there, then Becky Shelley is the person to speak to at NDS, and you can come to her through me because I'll put my details up on a slide. So this is the sorts of things that Becky can do. She can go and talk to your board or your executive team. She can run a workshop with staff. And basically what she'll do is help with the strategy and the planning for how you undertake the changes that your organisation need. And every organisation's needs will be slightly different. And then she's also that person who sits outside the organisation that you can check in with and go, how are we doing with this? Are we where we think we should be? What tips or resources have you got that we might be able to pick up and use for our own organisation's journey into making sure that you remain sustainable into the future and can continue delivering services. So, as I said, the Organisational Readiness Toolkit is the plug. That's why I'm here today, to be perfectly frank. It can be national. There's a benchmarking process for organisations. If they participate in the self-assessment process, they drop that information into an online process. They can then have their own organisation's responses compared to other organisations across the country, and then Becky can step in and support organisations to take the steps that they need to into the future. Okay. So if any of you do want to get involved in that process, take down my contact details and I'll get Becky in touch with you. Okay, thanks Andrew.